brothers, you are welcome to come closer if you want. I don't know if you can see this. The lighting, I don't know if the light's too bright or what. Oh, I need to be over here. You online, you can't come any closer, but you probably maybe have the best view. I don't know. Anyways, you can stay where you want, stay where you are, but you are welcome to do what you like. Well, I'm thankful to be here. I'm thankful for this inaugural Deacons Conference for the Presbytery in New York and New England, as far as I know. Has there been one before for this Presbytery? So this is a big step, a big deal. So thankful for Pastor Shingler coming into the Presbytery from outside and stirring things up in a good way. We had conversation, man, it was like 3 or 4 years ago, something like that, just when he was coming on. So this is really fun to see this come to fruition. And so very thankful. What I'm tasked with is to talk to you a little bit about the Presbytery Diaconal Committee, but I'm going to talk about it with relationship to the Committee on Diaconal Ministries denominationally, and then even the local church. And so I'll basically start with sharing with you about the Committee on Diaconal Ministries and what we do denominationally, much of which hopefully you're familiar with. And if you aren't, then we need to get you more plugged in. But it'll play very much into the relationship to the Presbytery Diaconal Committee and even locally. So the Orthodox Presbyterian Church General Assembly elects committees to oversee various aspects of the work of the church. So we have Committee on Foreign Missions, which you're familiar with, Home Missions, Christian Education. Together we call these Worldwide Outreach. These are all, again, elected by the General Assembly. Every year, everybody's on a 3-year term. All the guys elected to these committees are on 3-year terms, and so a third of these committees are reelected every General Assembly. There's a new committee on ministerial care that was started just a few years ago. That was kind of spawned out of some of the work of the Committee on Diaconal Ministries and the Committee on Pensions. There was a historic Committee on Pensions. Those put together created the Committee on Ministerial Care, which is doing wonderful work in caring for ministers in the OPC. And then ultimately the one in blue, Committee on Diaconal Ministries, and that's the committee that I serve. I've been connected with the Committee on Diaconal Ministries since 2007. I went to my first General Assembly, and at that time, the Committee on Diaconal Ministries, actually it was in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit, and there were many in the pews saying, hey, I want to go help. And it was actually Home Missions who stood forward and said, we'll head up, because the Committee on Diaconal Ministries was not staffed. It was not positioned to lead that charge. And so the Committee on Diaconal, that was, I think, a beginning of a reworking of the Committee on Diaconal Ministries. And so I came to my first General Assembly in 2007, read the report, and I said to David Haney and Bob Wright, both of whom were members of the committee and were at General Assembly, and I said, it's very exciting what's going on in Committee on Diaconal Ministries. And they said, you want to serve on the committee? And I said, well, maybe, I guess. And so there was an opening for a ruling elder, spot was open, and one name was put forward. And so I was elected with no competition. I guess there wasn't too many eager spots or eager servants to serve on that committee. But I was very thankful to get connected with the committee. And then 3 years later, the committee actually created a full-time role as an administrator, short-term missions coordinator, kind of cobbled things together to create a position. And I started working for the committee in 2010. And so now I'm in my 13th year, and it's been a great joy and to serve the committee. It's a great band of brothers. There you see our own Rick Dickinson on the right. He is currently the president of the committee, and we're very sad at this General Assembly he's going to step off for just a lot of things going on in his life. And we actually have some significant turnover. We're actually going to lose our our previous president, Nathan Trice, and Chris Sudlow, who has been on the committee, for a long time. Both Nathan and Chris have been on it for more than a decade. And so we are going to have a third of our committee turn over 2 ministers and one of our deacons. So you can pray that the Lord would raise up some good replacements for them. But it's great to have 4 deacons on the committee, and that was that's just a great blessing to have the diaconal wisdom on this committee. The committee meets 2 times a year, but we divide our work into subcommittees. And so most of our work is actually done by Zoom or email between committee meetings. It's really been so helpful for me to have 3 or 4, maybe sometimes 5 on a subcommittee where we can get together, we can find a time to get together and make a decision on something as opposed to getting 9 guys together. The way we've structured things is we have the full committee decide how is a subcommittee going to operate? What are their policies? What are their procedures? All of that stuff is blessed by the full committee, and then the subcommittee then enacts those policies and works within those bounds. And so we're not relegating some of the work to a smaller band, except that band is going to operate in the way that the full committee has agreed that they're going to work, and that's really worked really well for us. So we have 5 or 6 subcommittees, and almost all the different things that either come to us or are parts of the work of the committee can be relegated to a subcommittee, which is very helpful for me. We've got administration finance subcommittee. They're dealing with employee matters and the budget, that type of stuff. We have an aid request subcommittee. So as needs come to us from sister denominations, I'll talk about that. That's the aid request subcommittee. We have a disaster response subcommittee. So they're very focused on how do we respond to disasters, particularly those that affect our churches. We have a diaconal training subcommittee. Those are the guys who are going to be thinking about conferences and summits and articles and podcasts. And then we have a refugee ministry subcommittee. That's our newest subcommittee. Did I cover them all? I think. Oh, and a missionary deacon subcommittee. So very, very, very different topics, but all diaconal in nature. And so it's great to have guys be able to focus on a couple of those as opposed to everybody focused on everything. I remember when I first came on the committee, we didn't have any subcommittees, and we all dealt with everything. And so I remember coming to our meetings, and this was one topic, and we'd take a deep dive into this topic, and we'd come up for air, and we'd take a deep dive on the next topic, and we come up for air, and we take a deep dive, and it was just exhausting. And I don't think we actually did very good work because we just didn't have the capacity. There were all sorts of questions. When we took that deep dive, we had all sorts of questions that we didn't have answers to. We had to make a decision because we're here for 2 days to meet together. And so I think that the committee, it works much more effectively now and efficiently, and it's less exhausting. I was going to bring brochures. I forgot to bring them, but you're familiar with the CDM brochure. Hopefully, if you're not, I can send you some. But when you open that up, that's where I think the brochure does a good job of describing the work of the Committee on Diaconal Ministries. We're concerned with individuals in need. We're concerned with those affected by disasters. And we're concerned, I think, most importantly, with you, the deacon, the local deacon. I always say that's where diaconal work predominantly happens, in the local church. It's all about the local church. There are some instances where the Committee on Diaconal Ministries acts as a diaconate of the denomination when a sister church faces a crisis and asks for help. It's in that instance where we kind of act as a diaconate for the denomination. But that is unusual. Most diaconal ministries is happening locally, and so that's the deacons are our most important component. So with that in mind, I would say that probably our most important role is to encourage and train and provide resources for local deacons. We do that through, we've tried to get more and more articles in the Ordained Servant, as Rick was talking about. Even in New Horizons, we're trying to have more articles focused on the ministry of mercy. We love Presbytery-wide diaconal conferences, and I'm so thankful that I hope that this is a first of many on a regular basis, that where you on some sort of frequency where you're getting together, getting to know each other, and then we've also have opccdm.org. How many of you were at the summit in June? Good. Those are not to be missed, if at all possible. We only do them once every 4 or 5 years. I think those who have gone will testify to that. There's nothing like being with 200 deacons, and actually the singing is better than the singing at General Assembly. I mean, it is ruckus. It is so great. And so heartfelt, and nothing like a bunch of deacons singing. That's probably one of my favorite things. My other favorite thing that you can't get online, Zoom, or anything like that is this. This is probably the most important part of the Deacon Summit, is that hanging out around the fire pit. Those fire pits this year were so great, right? Wheaton added those. That was a new thing, and it was just so great to hang out in the evening, getting to know guys from across the country. We actually say that deacons have to fly to Chicago to meet the deacon who lives 20 miles down the road. Because deacons, this doesn't happen. This is the first, as far as we know, in this presbytery. Ministers, elders, they're getting together 2-3 times a year at presbytery meetings and other times. When do deacons get together? When do they get to know each other? It's at this, or you got to fly to Chicago to meet the deacon 20 miles down the road. And there are many who will tell you that they did not know the deacon who was literally 20 miles down the road. Now, you guys have bigger distances between your churches, but this is great. We do have all the talks from the summits are all on the website, opccdm.org. You can watch the video, but I don't know too many deacons who are going to. I don't know too many people who are going to sit and watch an hour-long anything. So it's actually now all been released on the podcast. Everybody got a podcast T-shirt? Everybody have one of those? If you don't, I have out on the couch in the narthex. There is your T-shirts. It starts medium, large, extra large, 2XL. So get your Reformed Deacon podcast. Special kudos to those who've listened to the Reformed Deacon podcast. Anybody listen to any episode? Who is not a podcast listener, like never listens to podcasts? How many of you? Okay. So that explains some of you. The others of you, you just need to get that one on your phone. But if you are not a podcast listener, I'd encourage you to look at doing that. It's like it's radio on demand. You get to decide what you're listening to. And when you're driving down these long roads, I know you guys do lots of driving around here. It's just so great to be able to listen to talks and stuff that you don't have time to do, be edified in that way. So Reformed Deacon podcast, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. The talks from the summit are all 12, I think, at least 12, maybe 15 talks are all on, the audio is all on the podcast, so you can listen to topics. We had Eric Watkins talk about the diaconal ministry and social justice. We had Stephen Tracy talk about disability in the church, refugee ministry, Seth Long, who lives in Neon, Kentucky, and reflecting on diaconal ministry. Lots of different great talks. So avail yourself of those if you didn't go to the summit. And if you did go to the summit, avail yourself of the talks that you weren't able to go to, right? We had 3 workshops at a time, so it was really fun to be there and say, there's actually content going on here that there's more to be had, because because you can't be at 3 places at once. So we have a website, opccdm.org. I was flattered maybe a year ago when a PCA minister, he either called me or wrote to me, I don't remember which, but he said, David, I found opccdm.org, and it was like finding a continent after living on an island. I said, wow, that's high praise. But this is not necessarily some masterminded thing. We just, as we're doing things and we're developing things, we just keep putting them on the website. So if you go to the website and you click on training, there's all the Presbytery Diaconal Summit 5, which is actually I wanted to focus on NDS 4, National Diaconal Summit 4, 2022. That's the summit we just talked about. That's where you'll find all that type of stuff. We have a special ministry called Deacon Check-In. Anybody heard of Deacon Check-In? Anybody participate in that? If you'd like to, like on a quarterly basis, just touch base with a deacon from across the country, we're happy to pair you up, and you can have a call with somebody who's like totally out of your neck of the woods, but maybe you can talk about things that you couldn't talk about with those in your church because it's sensitive, or you just need encouragement. Well, the summit training videos are there from past summits. This has been our fourth summit, fourth or fifth, anyway, fourth summit, I think. So we've got lots of videos. The diaconal case studies, those have been great for training material. That was actually developed for our 2012 Deacon Summit. And so there's lots of things on the website. The podcast, we just talked about that. That's been super fun. It was actually the Committee on Christian Education who approached us a couple years ago. They were we've been doing these national summits for deacons, and they're like, well, we really should do something to encourage ruling elders. Do we do a summit? And they basically said, you know what, let's do a podcast. Ruling elders would benefit from a podcast. And so they said, hey, Committee on Diaconal Ministries, would you guys like to do a companions podcast for deacons? And we said, sure. And so that was the genesis of the Reformed Deacon podcast. And to me, it was very intimidating to think about doing this, but actually it's been a lot of fun to have a diaconal conversation that then a bunch of deacons are eventually going to be able to listen in on and think about and be blessed by. So we'd love to have you on it. We'd love your ideas of what you'd like talked about. So yeah, send your ideas. This is your medium. And if you're not listening, get it on your phone and listen. The one that's become has had a lot of hits is what we call real world cases, and it's actually using those case studies that I talked about. It was so great to have. We had 3 seasoned deacons on the call. Had Chris Sudlow, John Voss, and my other Voss. Why am I drawing a blank? Anyways, it'll come to me. But it was great to have these guys, all of them, probably more than 20 years of diaconal ministry, and have them. We read the case, and what do you think? And what should we do? And one guy says, I think we should do this. And the other one says, yeah, but have you thought about that? And, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And to see the plurality actually take place with these seasoned deacons interplaying with one another, thinking about the complexity. Diaconal ministries is tough. It's difficult. Nothing is straightforward. And you've got to make wise decisions. And so that's been kind of our a bestseller, you could say, the real world cases. We got another one that's going to be set to release soon. On the back of the brochure, we talk about our Presbyterian form of government. This is, to me, one of the I love our Presbyterian form of government. I think it's biblical. Maybe that's why I love it. But I do think it also really applies to how we do diaconal ministries. And so the concept is that diaconal ministries, again, predominantly starts local. And this is where we're going to get into the Presbytery Diaconal Committee. So pay attention here. So this is, so you're dealing with matters locally, in and out, day in, day out, as things arise. But there are sometimes needs that present themselves in your local church that can exceed the capacity of your local church. And that's where the Presbytery Diaconal Committee comes in. Now that's where Mike Shingler's on the committee. And actually, I was going to ask you, Mike, who else is on the Diaconal Committee? Okay. Yep. Yep. Okay. So and these are two deacons. Yep. So we have two deacons and a minister. And I don't know if it's a minister or presbyter. Probably could be a minister or elder, or do you know? Yeah. So the history with this presbytery was that the diaconal committee responsibility would rove from diaconate to diaconate. And so the diaconal committee, if I can just jump back, so the diaconal committees was something that the committee on diaconal ministries, who I serve, the Presbytery diaconal committees were all different flavors in all different presbyteries. And this was an unusual makeup where that responsibility would rove from one diaconate to another diaconal. The problem with that structure is you don't have any history. So all of a sudden you're there one day and the elders come back from Presbytery and say, by the way, you guys are the Presbytery they say to your diaconate, you guys are the Presbytery Diaconal Committee for the next 2 years. And you're like, we're the what? Who is that, and what do we need to do? We're responsible for who? And so there was no building of momentum. There was no building of history. You didn't know what the previous diaconate had done. It was just all of a sudden you had this responsibility. And so we really have been encouraging the presbyteries to have it be a standing committee of the presbytery. Have it develop momentum. Mike, you've been a member of this committee now for how many years? 4 or 5 years, and now we're having a conference. Well, it takes time to develop to get to the point of having a conference. Probably the reason you never had a conference before is because it went from diaconate to diaconate, and who's going to pull that off in a 2-year time, or even think that that's something they should do? But now you have a standing committee. This is a great development in this presbytery, and this is a fruit of that. That the fact that we're here today is a fruit of that change that was made in the Presbytery of New York, New England, to make it a standing committee, so you can have some developed tenure on the committee, and actually gain momentum in the work you're doing, and grow as a committee. I mean, the Committee on Diaconal Ministries denominationally, we are growing in the work as we build on what we're doing. We're not just passing it from one to the other. So this committee now exists, and you need to know about this committee, you locally, because when you are faced with a need in your local church that exceeds the capacity, and you look at the situation and say, this is a legitimate diaconal need. This is a church member. We should help the situation as far as we could. But you know what? We're tapped out. We ran out of funds. You have not run out of funds until you've reached out to the Presbytery Diaconal Committee. And the Presbytery Diaconal Committee then has the ability to spread that need across the presbytery. They can say, we've got this great need in this one church that we really should meet. The local deacons ascertain that it's something we should meet. We've looked at it. We agree. We concur. And so can we share with that? And then if it actually exceeds the capacity of the regional church, the presbytery, it can then be bumped up to the denominational level. And so as you look at that one need in that one church, you've not really come to the end of your ability to meet that need until it's actually been all the way to the denomination level. And that's, to me, like a beautiful aspect of our Presbyterian form of government, a connected church. We're not congregational. We're not independent. We're part of, each particular congregation is part of a much bigger whole. And it's, when one part of the body suffers, we suffer together. This is a picture of that. And this is how it actually can happen. and should happen. So you really, this is super important for all of you to know. Now, you may ask, well, how do we bring that need to the Presbytery Diaconal Committee? I'll leave that to your Presbytery Diaconal Committee to answer, and that's a legitimate question. I don't know if they have a specific form or all that type of stuff, but you need to know that you have this huge resource that maybe you didn't know you had. So we call the Presbytery Diaconal Committee the linchpin, that kind of that key component right there in the network of deacons. The committee also, they minister to ministers. Some of your ministers may face needs, and they have the opportunity to minister to them, and that's where they can use funds. How is the Presbytery Diaconal Committee funded, Mike? Do you actually ask a per capita?
We do, and then
Okay. Okay. Okay, so there's a per capita. What is the per capita? Do you know what it is? Or are you local diaconates aware of this per capita asking that goes to the Presbytery Diaconal Committee? If you're not, you should be, because that it should either come to you or it comes to your church. Maybe it's part of the church budget. A lot of times it goes to the diaconate, and that's an appropriate place for it to come from too, for the diaconate. But again, they need funds to enable them to do this, to do the other things that we're doing. But ideally, that comes from the diaconate. And ministering to ministers is a part of what they would need resources for. Coordinated regional conferences, projects, fellowship, just like what we're here to do, lead in disaster response. We could talk a little bit more about that. But we're very interested in the Presbytery Diaconal Committee. So we've really sought to encourage them. We actually have a conference specifically for Presbytery Diaconal Committee members. Our last one was in 2019, but we'll be gathering together, Lord willing, in Chicago in November. And I would just encourage you to encourage your PDC to attend. And Mike is actually signed up, and I don't know if the other two are, but hopefully they will. Yeah. So let's see how this works. Presbytery Diaconal Committee, that linchpin, that center of all things. Here we go. So local diaconate, that's you guys, right? But in your presbytery, there actually also might be congregations without deacons. Do you know of any congregations without deacons? In West Lebanon, that's a congregation without deacons. Church plants, oftentimes church plants is an area, that's a weak area, that's a particular interest of mine right now, is church plants are oftentimes, we talk about overseeing sessions, but we don't really talk about overseeing deacons, diaconates. And yet I would argue that you're more likely to see significant diaconal situations in church plants where you're really casting in a net, bringing people in, than you are in established congregations. And so congregations without deacons, or church plants without deacons is an important area. The local diaconates send money to the Presbytery Diaconal Committee. The Presbytery Diaconal Committee only has funds that it receives from you. Okay? So it receives funds from you, but it can send those funds back in the process that we just talked about. You have this need that exceeds your capacity. You appeal to the Presbytery Diaconal Committee. They can send needs, but they also, I don't know if you can see my little picture, but there's a, idea guy, light bulb. They can also be a source for wisdom, for interacting on your need, that type of thing. This isn't just about funds, but I think it's us interacting together, bringing wisdom to a matter. And the Presbytery Diaconal Committee is also your conduit to the Committee on Diaconal Ministry. We just talked about that on this one. But again, funds, the Committee on Diaconal Ministries, our funds, the only place we get funds is from the local church. So it's really only from you. The Presbytery Diaconal Committee and the Committee on Diaconal Ministries ultimately receives all its funding from the local church. But it's not for us to go use it however we want to. as needed, those funds can come back to you. Now, hopefully, Committee on Diaconal Ministries, we're producing resources and all sorts of other things, but sometimes there's a need where the funds can come back to you in that local diaconate or those congregations without deacons. Oftentimes, again, this is all funneled through the Presbytery Diaconal Committees. Okay, is there questions on this? This is super important, I think, and I just want to see, do you guys have questions on that aspect of things? Yes.
Not a question, Dave. I did get to serve on the church deacons were chosen to be the Presbytery deacons.
Yep.
And it was just like you said, when we started, we knew nothing. And by the time we finished, we had a pretty good idea, but we got an extension, so we actually served an extra year or two. It is a real blessing to have established committee.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, you just came up to speed and now you handed it off to somebody else who starts at zero. And yeah, there's just no momentum. Okay, so there's one side of it and this is one side of things, but I want you to look at a whole different side of it. And again, this is with regards to our ministers. We have active ministers and retired ministers and widows. That's another area of responsibility for the Presbytery Diaconal Committees. And now, of course, they don't send funds in, but they can receive funds from the Presbytery Diaconal Committee as needs arise. But they can also receive funds from now a different committee. So the Committee on Diaconal Ministries, this responsibility used to be a part of the Committee on Diaconal Ministries, but with the new Committee on Ministerial Care, things associated with ministers get funneled to them. And we actually, I should show, I need another arrow. Actually, the Committee on Diaconal Ministries, we do send $25,000 a year we send to the Committee on Ministerial Care for their use in their diaconal care of active ministers in particular. So anyways, the Committee on Ministerial Care also has funds, and those funds can come back. But again, hopefully you see that the Presbytery Diaconal Committee is at the heart of it all, and that's really the importance of the Presbytery Diaconal Committee. Local diaconates and active ministers all flowing through denominationally, but Presbytery Diaconal Committee being at the heart of that. Are you guys aware of the Committee on Ministerial Care? Yeah. Another great committee there. Someone was asking about places where deacons can serve outside of the local church. There's deacons on this committee, there's deacons on this committee, and there's deacons on this committee. And those would all be blessed by having deacons. Yes. Okay, sure. So, and I would really encourage you to consider serving, consider being willing to serve. If you have the interest and the capacity to do that, you'd be really blessed in serving on ministerial care, Committee on Diaconal Ministries, Presbytery Diaconal Committee. We need men to serve. Now, one of the things I'll quote David Haney. He said. Oh, and this is one of the many things that I quote him in saying is he said, committees don't do things, people do. And so that's where committees need people who are willing to serve. We don't need people to, fill a chair. We need people who are willing to serve, and that service and that action is through the people. Disaster response is another important area for the Committee on Diaconal Ministries. And more and more, we've really leaned on the presbytery to do that, to lead in that. In 2016, I remember I was in my office, and there was flooding in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I remember receiving a call or an email, I don't remember what it was, but somebody reached out to me and said, David, are we going to respond to the flooding in Louisiana? And I thought, who am I, 1,000 miles from Louisiana to make any decision about whether we are responding to flooding in Louisiana? Shouldn't the Presbytery of the South speak to that? And in the same way, and that was really the beginning of a transition of just purely a denominational disaster response entity to actually more and more encouraging, facilitating, and enabling presbyteries to take much more ownership of disaster response, which actually usually is a significant regional event. And so that's been a great blessing. And again, that's an area where it's important to have continuity with the Presbytery Diaconal Committee, because disaster response is it's an area, I've been involved in it for about 15 years, but every disaster we learn new things and we learn new things. And it doesn't mean you have to have 15 years to be involved, but it is, there's lots to be learned in it. And so it's been, and actually in God's providence in 2017, so in 2016 had this kind of epiphany moment about, wow, presbyteries really should be involved. And that was God's preparation, because actually in 2017, we had 3 hurricanes hit 3 presbyteries within 3 weeks. And it was because the Presbytery of the Southwest got involved in responding to Hurricane Harvey in Houston. And the Presbytery of the South, Presbytery Diaconal Committee, got involved in Florida after Irma. And the Presbytery of New Jersey got involved as unusually as it is, Puerto Rico is part of the Presbytery of New Jersey. They were responding to Hurricane Maria, and that was very helpful. So, yeah, go ahead, Rick.
Just to remind folks that the conference in November is to facilitate networking between PDCs.
Yes. Yeah. The conference in November, Presbytery Diaconal Summit, we call it, it will afford a lot of opportunity for connectionalism between your Presbytery Diaconal Committee and the Presbytery Diaconal Committees of other presbyteries, and the ones that have really, moved the ball forward. The one that's moved the ball forward the most with regards to disaster response is the Presbytery of the Southeast. And Mike Cloy has been a big part of that. He's got a lot of history with disaster response. But that's been an area that's prone to significant disasters, although I know that you guys have had your share of flooding. And by the way, flooding to me is the form of disaster where we are most needed to get involved. And the reason for that is if your house burns down, you're covered by insurance, most likely. If your house gets hit by a tornado, you're most likely covered by insurance. But if flood waters come from outside your house to inside your house, you are most likely not covered by insurance. And that's a catastrophic event. When you have those floodwaters that have mixed with the sewage, mixed with pesticides, those waters, even if you have this much water, if it enters your house, there's huge remediation that needs to happen, or you're going to have a significant health hazard. And so that's where we've found that that's kind of basically become the sweet spot for where our coming together to respond to those disasters is most important. The most recent one that's currently still ongoing is in Neon, Kentucky, when they had 6.5 feet of water flow through the church. That church was not in a flood zone, and had just a little bit of water come in maybe the year before, but otherwise had never had water in it before, and it had 6.5 feet of water because they had 9 inches of rain in 5 hours. And so it happens, but that's where we can work together in these ways. We just opened this fund in February. This is, again, areas where we can work together outside of our church. Somebody testified to the participation in the Crates for Ukraine. Just getting ahead of myself. The $150,000 was received for Turkey. And I, for some reason, the Crates for Ukraine fell off. The Ukraine fell off. That slide came out of my slide deck, so I'm going to talk about that here. But thank you for your participation. How many of you had the opportunity, how many of your congregation had the opportunity to participate in Crates for Ukraine? There could be another one coming down the pike, and so if you didn't have the opportunity to participate, I had the opportunity to go to Ukraine in March, and they are so thankful for the Craze for Ukraine. If I can take this opportunity to thank you on their behalf for your participation, your contributions. The goods that have been sourced through the Craze for Ukraine are being known throughout the country as just super high quality, and they receive stuff from all over the place. But what's coming through the Craze for Ukraine is of particular quality and particular need, and a lot of it is actually stop the bleeding need. One of the things I learned when I was there was that if you are injured on or near the front lines, it's basically 4 hours till you can get to a field hospital. And so if you get hit in the leg or some other place and you're bleeding out, if they can't stop that bleeding, that you're most likely going to die. And so they've received even testimonies all the way back to the church. This is the ministry of the church. It's known that these are coming from God's people to the saints and strangers on behalf of the church. That manifold ministry of mercy that's described in the Book of Church Order. As those come back, there are those who've testified from the front lines that it's literally saved their life, and that's super encouraging. We don't know how the Lord is going to use this scattering of seeds, in a sense. All the things that go out are designated as from a church. They have the church website. They have the publication house website on the material. And so it's, they call it, it's of course sowing of seed, but it's also breadcrumbs back to the source, and hopefully they can, find the true source. Yes.
Thank you for your podcast. You gave so many details of what's happening over there.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Mark's referring to the recent podcast episode where I had the opportunity to reflect on our time together, and another plug for the podcast. Mercy Minute, we send this out quarterly. Again, just a way to keep you informed of things going on. If you have ministries, diaconal ministries in your churches that are unique, that we could share with others, for us to get ideas from one another. That's this newsletter actually, and I wanted to pass this around. If you already receive, if you received my, I like to call it sanctified spam, you don't need to put your name on the list. But if you don't, and you're willing to receive sanctified spam, I'd love to have your contact information. Of course, the storm report goes out once a month, and that's it's short-term missions and disaster response short-term outreach, relief, and missions. Okay, and I'm right on what you said. You gave me 5 minutes extra, so I'm at 4. Any quick questions? We're going to go to. We will have a question time and thoughts, but anything from you at this point? Okay, you'll be ready for the quiz that comes later. Thank you, brothers.
We have a little bit of time between now and lunch at noon. And David mentioned the saying of deacons traveling to Chicago to meet the deacons 20 miles away. And that kind of strikes a note of, I think, a primary goal of our having this particular conference was for the deacons 20 miles away, or in this case, it's going to be a little more than 20 miles, but to be able to get together, meet, encourage one another, swap stories, war stories, if you will, kind of thing. So this segment from now until noon designated for open discussion amongst church diaconates. So basically a time, I think what we envision is a time here to share from your experience in your churches, either maybe things that have been roadblocks and frustrations that you're facing, or maybe things that have been happening in your church that you've been involved in that have been encouraging and have been working, ideas and that kind of thing. And not necessarily, this is not a question answer to David, Rick, or me, but actually amongst ourselves, including David and Rick. And if you're going to ask me something, I'm probably going to have to ask them for the answer anyways. Anyone want to have something you want to share in terms along those lines? Rick?
Could you describe the way local Board of Deacons wants to get in touch with the Presbytery?
Yes.
Or Presbytery Committee? How do they do that?
Yeah. So while you're thinking about what you want to share from your local experiences and local churches, when there's a need, whatever need to contact the Presbytery Diaconal Committee, you can reach out to me, to Craig Comstock. As I said, he's going to be back here he should be back here in about an hour and a half. He's at a funeral at the moment. Or Luke Wilhelm also is on the committee. If you don't have my contact information, let me know, because I'll make sure you have that before you leave here today. We do have a form for diaconal request, and I've taken a kind of a shortcut because I just took yours and tweaked it a little. And so it's basically going to be similar to what we would submit if we needed to submit a request to the CDM with, again, just a little bit different. But so we would send a form. So we would discuss if it's a specific need, what the parameters of that need, but we would ask to have a form filled out, and requests that come to us ordinarily, unless it's coming from a minister or retired minister, like David talked about in the talk here, if it's coming from a need within the church that exceeds the resources of the church, it is a request that's coming from the diaconal committee, or I'm sorry, the diaconal board in the church, rather than from an individual in the church. Does that make sense? So we're not saying, help this person out and then send them to us. We're saying, help this person out, and then when you realize you need help helping that person out, then you come to us. And that's an important distinction because I can think in my head, I can think of an example without sharing details that came to us recently. It was not an individual in the church. It was actually somebody within the sphere of ministers, retired ministers, ordained folks, ministers within the church. And thinking about how we might address that need with wisdom in a situation where we're a committee scattered across the presbytery. We can't be the sort of boots on the ground, gathering the information, sitting down and praying and talking through and seeing face to face, and having that's the work of the local diaconate to work through those things. And so we're asking that you as deacons are investigating, gathering the data and information, and then filling that out and sending that to us in terms of here's how we've done our due diligence, that you're sending that to us as a committee, which we in turn, if that, like David said, and 4 years ago there was a need in the presbytery that ended up not being a need providentially, but I remember, David might remember having conversation over the phone where we were, if I remember right, we were going to be looking at a need, was it $100,000? We were estimating $100,000 for one family, potentially. And well, the local deacons can't meet that. The Presbytery Diaconal Committee can't meet that, right? So that's an example of potentially where the local diaconate's working with this person who has this very excessive need, are then coming to us as a diaconal committee and saying, wow, here's the details of this need and how we have gone this far and as far as we can go, and now we're asking for help. And then we would look at that as a diaconal committee and say, yeah, we think it's a need that we should help with, and we can't meet it altogether either. And I know at the time we were even discussing if that did come to fruition and would be in that neighborhood of amount, we would publish that across the OPC and ask congregations for special offerings and so on. But it's exciting at the same time to think, if you had somebody with a need of $100,000, that's not beyond, first of all, it's not beyond God's provision, right? It never is. But how that God can use us as presbytery, as denomination, as the Church of Christ, to meet a need like that, potentially. So, any questions on that, how you would?
And I can tell you that there is actually a need in one of our churches that now for more than 10 years, the local church has been doing significantly their part. The family's been doing significantly their part. The local church, presbytery, and denominationally, we've been addressing up, I think it's around over $20,000 a year to this one family coming from the Committee on Diaconal Ministries for more than 10 years. So, $100,000 is not, is not a ridiculous number. I think one of the beautiful things about when something gets bubbled up is that it does, you bring minds onto it that are outside the context of the local church. Sometimes we can lose our way because we're just too close to it. And it's helpful to have a little bit more objective minds on it. And that, I think that's where the Presbyterian may have their own set of questions. They may have some follow-up questions that really helps solidify. I don't know all the particulars of how that thing didn't materialize, but I think it was probably part of it, that it wasn't just like, oh, this is just going to be paid. Hard questions were asked and that led to discerning by whoever that this is actually not a need that we really should meet.
Right. Accounts of works in your churches, something that's been either an encouragement or we tried something didn't work. Yep.
Would be interested to know if most of our churches and our presbytery have received a deacon's offering on occasions of the Lord's Supper, or how that works locally.
How deacons' offerings are done in your churches. Yes.
So at First Church of Merrimack, the way that we handle the tithes and offerings is we typically, as part of our every Sunday worship service, we have a brief time of collection for tithes and offering. And the congregation is also aware of and knows and can designate a portion of their tithes and offerings specifically to the Deacons Needy Fund. We have a separate fund that's a separate line item in our budgeting and all of that, that enables us to serve those kinds of needs independent of the standard budgeting. So that's the way that we've always handled it at First Church. And it's worked out pretty well for us so far. We have had times where that balance is quite low, but currently it's fairly healthy, and we have we consistently see that typically when we give to those in need, within the next month or so, typically those same funds or more are redeposited, not obviously by those people that had that need. And we're not communicating the balance on a regular basis except for annually. So these needs that we're meeting are being met by our congregation without necessarily knowing what the needs are that we're meeting on a regular basis. So that's how we handle it anyways.
Clarify, does the session maintain a certain amount of money for diaconal distribution that's supplemented by those special gifts, or how does that?
It's all special gifts actually at this point. We have had occasions where the balance was low enough that we had an infusion, so to speak, of budget from the general budget allocated over to the Deacons Needy Fund. But that's just handled as part of our normal budgeting process annually.
Is that a special gift without payback?
All gifts from the Deacons Needy Fund are all.
No, I meant when the session approves.
With that, yeah, it's not, there's no payback. It's just the church as a whole votes on the budget, and the budget basically is just saying, we're approving a line item of X amount to go over to the deacons board, or the Deacons Needy Fund specifically, for meeting Deacons Needy Fund type things.
So the question again is, how do our local congregations, how do our local boards of deacons receive funds for distribution?
We do have a monthly collection, so it's essentially an offering separate from the tithes. So once a month, usually the third Sunday, it's it's designated as a diaconal contribution, and the deacons just maintain it, and funds go in and out of there, and usually our balance, we've got a healthy balance, so we're able to meet the needs.
People would know ahead of time that if they wanted to lay up for diaconal above their offerings, that they would have an opportunity on the third Lord's Day to do.
Right.
At Pilgrim Bangor, it's done in conjunction with the Lord's Supper. Anybody else do that?
We do the Lord's Supper every week, so we're different that way.
Yes, Covenant Church in Amsterdam, we were for many years doing the Lord's Supper every other month, and that would be the diaconal fund, would be a second offering. And most of the time, we had enough funds. And if something really big came up, sometimes the session would let the congregation know there was a need, and we'd have a separate offering. Or occasionally, they would even supplement from the budget. However, we've changed recently. I have a new pastor too, but what we've gone to, we're now doing the Lord's Supper every month, and what we're doing is putting envelopes out right when people walk in, right next to the bulletins, and they can pick up an envelope. So we don't actually do a second offering, but it's supplemented that way.
We do similarly in Syracuse. We have an envelope that people can put the offering in for the deacon's account, to the deacon's fund. When we had the crates for Ukraine, that was a separate offering that people could make specific for that effort. I'm sure that most of you are doing the same thing.
Are most boards maintaining those funds in liquidable form as opposed to savings?
So at Second Parish, we do the deacon's offering once a month with the Lord's Supper. It's its own separate offering that's at the end of the service. Though we also have, it's known throughout our congregation if we have a specific diaconal need that you can always receive a gift. The other thing that we have is we also have online giving with our church, and that actually really became a big thing during COVID. And through our online platform, it can be designated for the deacons as well. So we actually receive stuff weekly through our online platform.
You know who you use for that?
Tidely?
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 Tidely.
Yeah.
Is there a cost involved with them managing that?
I don't know if there's an initial setup cost or anything like that. So I wasn't involved in the setting that up. I know probably our pastor Danny was involved in that setup, but yeah, it's just one additional way that if your churches are interested, I can get more information on that and relay it back.
Given by that venue could be earmarked to whatever end. Right?
Correct. It could go to the general fund. It could go to deacons, or we actually have a separate designation as well. We have a family that serves in Romania and actually had been in Ukraine prior to the war in Ukraine. And they've got a foundation, Hearts of Hope. So we also have a designation for that as well.
For counting purposes, how do you align giving with, you do with a particular Lord's Day tally within that week, or how does the counting?
Anything that comes into the Deacons Fund,
Or general fund?
or so the general fund, we keep it completely separate.
But that's within the same account with Tidely, correct?
It goes into two separate accounts.
Oh, it does, okay.
Yes, it does. There's the option to have it split. If you were to go on to Tidely, you can say you wanted to give $200. You could say 150 is going to the general fund, 50 is going to the deacons. It goes into two separate accounts.
And in those accounts, the deposits or the transfer of money would be dated,
Correct.
yes?
Correct.
You would fit those givings into a particular week?
Correct.
presumably?
Correct.
That potentially could be a little tricky with accountability, right? I mean, hopefully we're all using at least a two-person checks and balances with accounting funds. Somebody would have to account for those funds.
That get direct deposited? Yes. Yeah.
Michael, I'm just curious, it'd be interesting to know, the churches that are here today, how many have one deacon, how many have two, how many have three or four, just to get a sense as to the, sort of the horsepower that is there at our local churches.
How many?
Silver Bangor has 3.
First Church has 4. Merrimack Valley has 3.
ESPN has 4.
Second parish has 4.
How many do you have here, Barry? Two.
We have 2 here in Barry.
Are we all aspiring to have 7?
First Church has had 7 at varying times.
Can I ask a question, Mike?
Yeah, sure.
I guess I'm interested in hearing how the churches are doing post-COVID. Are you seeing more diaconal needs, or is it about are things about the same.
In Amsterdam, things didn't change very much. Many of our people that are in the congregation were well off, were able to manage, and for whatever reason, we didn't get a lot of influx of other requests either.
Anybody else?
Just a follow-up question, as this is coming from someone who's not a deacon, hasn't been a deacon. I wonder if today, if there's any consensus among the group as to what is the single biggest challenge that deacons face? Does it vary from church to church, or is there a common challenge that is consistent across our churches? For those that have one deacon, it could be that, well, manpower. We only have one person. So maybe they're the exception. But for those that have 2 or 3 or 4 deacons, what is there consensus among the group as to what's the most consistent, most difficult challenge that you face as deacons, so that we can be praying for you?
Here's another question. Are most of the deacons' names published in the bulletin each week in most of our churches?
Ours are not published in the bulletin weekly. They are on our website, and they are published after the annual meeting when everyone's elected.
Are names and phone numbers?
Yes.
Are written?
So being the only deacon in Syracuse and having practically no training, I just kind of had to guess at a lot of things on how to do things, especially when I was approached and asked for help. It's always financial help. Very rarely do they ask me am I asked to do this or that at their homes, although that does occur. But it's usually the same needy people that seem to come to the church first. To me, it would be like, I can't see myself coming to the church other than as a last resort. But some people, I think, feel that they could go to the church is their first action. So initially, I had a hard time because I didn't really know what to do. Saying no. So it was a journey to learn how to say no to people, and I found out that it's okay to say no to people, and they're even okay with you telling them no. So I wouldn't hesitate after you do an investigation on what their actual need is. Is it really a need, or is it something that they just want? I've had to go and help people with their budgeting because they seem to consistently have the same problem managing money. And money is a difficult subject to talk about with a lot of people. They don't like the idea of, you even coming into their home and telling them how to spend their money. But once people commit to the Lord, and tithing is a difficult thing for a lot of people, I think. Money in general is their security. And once they start relying on the Lord as their security, money is nothing, as we all know. Those of us who have tithed from the beginning or I wasn't always a Christian. I was raised as a Roman Catholic. So, if I gave $5, I thought I was giving a lot of money as a Catholic. But once I started tithing and then more, I just relied on, once you can resign to the fact that the Lord's going to take care of you, tithing is easy. And I've never turned back, and we've never needed. The Lord has always given us more than we needed, and once you realize that, life is a lot easier for a lot of people. But there's always the needy people out there. I'm going on and on here. But learning to say no was very difficult for me in the beginning. So what I would do is if I had a question in my mind whether or not this person had a real need, I would ultimately just subsidize it myself out of my pocket. And then I would consider that part of my diaconal offering to the diaconal fund without actually going through the fund to take care of whatever the need was. And I still do that on occasion, more out of a matter of convenience. Since I'm the only one, I'll get a call from somebody at work while I'm at work. Hey, I need $20 for gas. I mean, we're out. I'm destitute. You're my last resort. Yep, meet me at the back door of my office building where I'm working downtown, and I'll take care of that myself. So, just out of a matter of convenience, I'll do it that way. But that doesn't happen that often. But it's usually the same needy person or people that need something like that. I haven't had to go and help anybody with their budget recently. Actually, in the last couple of years, one person passed away. I hope she's with the Lord. I think she is. But I guess the bottom line is that if someone is trying to scam the church for money, the Lord knows, and that's the main thing. So I may not always be able to come to a determination on whether or not that person is scamming the church or not. But I know that the Lord knows, and I'll err on the side of caution. And if I feel that the church can take care of that small need, I'll take care of it, even if it's out of my own pocket. So better safe than sorry, I guess. But that's all I've got to say.
That
More than enough, I'm sure.
touches on what a little bit of the burning question in my mind of that I'm hoping maybe we come back to after lunch a little bit on just how in your different diaconates, like what kind of process of working through and evaluating requests, just a real practical matter. And it occurred to me, John, as you were speaking about people maybe are not expecting you to delve into their finances and come in their home and tell them how to spend their money. And I mean, I like that. And I'm not a deacon, so I'm grateful I don't generally have to do that. But I'm a pastor, so in other ways I end up having to get into people's business in ways they were not expecting and might not appreciate. With that, though, and it ties into something Rick was talking about earlier, it makes such a difference, and I'm sure you've seen this and experienced it over your years at Hope as a deacon, what a difference it makes if and when they can see that you love them. When they can see and know that you love them, and they can see your heart in what you're trying to do for them. Now that may be, I know, different thing when you're dealing with just random cold call off the street, but particularly those who maybe are part of the church and have needs and come to us when they know our heart for them. I think it makes a big difference. But it takes maybe some time to help them to see that's the purpose here for them and for their good and their not only materially but spiritually, because you can never separate those two things. The whole there's the gospel over here and then there's the this stuff over here. But they're not two separate. There might be separate branches of ministry, but they're all part of gospel ministry. I've been impressed with that as I've been teaching through the book of Acts in Sunday school. I know I got to stop. We need to go to lunch. But just how much of the book of Acts, you think of the book of Acts and people received the Holy Spirit and the evidence was they spoke in tongues. More often the evidence was they had a big heart to give and share what they had, more often than some other kind of miraculous indications that the Holy Spirit working in the church, sharing burdens and material needs. So with that, let me go ahead and give thanks for the food, and then if there are instructions regarding lunch, I'll hand that over to whoever's in charge here. So let me go ahead and give thanks for the food first. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for the time that we have shared together so far. Thank you, Lord, for sending your Holy Spirit to minister to us, to guide and direct us through this day and time of encouragement and discussion. And Lord, we thank you for the food that has been provided for us, for the hands that have prepared it, for the willingness to share not only in material things and blessings, but in the labor and time in preparation. We ask, Father, that you bless the food to us, that you bless our time in fellowship around the tables. We ask in Jesus' name, amen. Mike?
Would it be possible for us to step outside for just a quick picture? Sure.